Today I want to talk about some roach floats or floats for general float fishing that have evolved over the years. They're patterns that have been around 60, 70 years, and yet match anglers look at them and laugh. They're what we might call Room 101 floats. And I'm just going to talk about three floats that people make. They still make them with great skill, and yet when it comes down to it, there is always a much better alternative, and there's a reason why you won't find these floats in any of the manuals on float fishing by match anglers. I'm talking about anything, well, all of them, anything by Ivan Marks, Kevin Ashurst, Jim Baxter's books. No one uses these floats because they're no good. They look wonderful, they do look wonderful. So let's start off with a float that was designed possibly in the 1950s. Richard Walker talked about this float and said how wonderful they were, probably made out of elder pith. Don't say that when you're drunk. Or balsa wood. And I can remember commercial versions of this float being available in about 1970, and I actually saw someone using one on the Thames back then, and I made my own versions. But as time went on, I realised that this float has got a massive snag. The float I'm talking about is a Fluted Haven, and this one's been made out of one piece of balsa. I made it. It's just balsa, all balsa, the stem, the tip, and then I've just taken a piece of balsa down and cut out the grooves with a very sharp knife and sanded it down, and it looks wonderful. And there are all sorts of versions of this. People take a piece of thin square balsa, about 3 or 4 millimeter, glue pieces on, shape them. And Richard Walker went on about it gripping the water, that you could trot this, you could cast it out, and you could mend the line without it going off track. Well, really? There's a problem. This will go down at the speed of the current at the surface, because it's right at this is going to catch the current. But the water doesn't move like that. Where you want the speed, the correct speed you want the float to move, is the speed you want your bait moving, which is the speed near the riverbed, which is nearly always slower than it is at the surface. So this is pushing through quite fast and dragging your bait through quite quickly. If you take a conventional Haven like this one, which is just knocked together with a crow quill and a balsa body, it's very streamlined, and the water will flow past it. It won't grip the water, it will flow past it. You can still, it takes a fair bit of weight. You can make these up to huge sizes, taking 10 grams if you want, but this is just a typical one taking about 7 BB. And you can mend the line, it won't go off course. There's a skill involved, yes, but that's what you want. You don't want flutes on it. And the other thing, of course, with the streamlined version is if you overshot it slightly and hold it back, it will sit nice and pretty much vertical, and you can hold it back so you can slow it down and you can achieve that presentation that you want. With these flutes, what happens when you hold it back? The current catches it and it lays flat or nearly flat. You don't want the float like laying flat. If these were any good, match anglers would have made them and used them by the 100. They're no good. No match angler has ever advocated using one of these. So whilst people make these floats, they look wonderful. Put them in your float box, admire them, say, oh, isn't it wonderful? Don't bother. I'm tempted to snap it in half. I'm not going to. I'd have to make another one. I did make one of these when I was about 14, and back then I couldn't afford many split shot, and I realised that just how many split shot this darn thing took. and it was about a tin of split shot. So I actually pared off the vanes, and it had a cane base. It became my first homemade stick float. I caught a lot of fish with it as a stick float. Can't remember what happened to it. I've lost it or broke it or something many years ago. But it was quite a good stick float once I got rid of all the rubbish off it. So that's the first float. Don't bother with fluted floats. And I've seen, if you go back to magazines of the 60s especially, you'll see antenna floats. So you've got a fluted body on it and a long tip. What are these people thinking? What are they thinking? Don't bother. Just stick to nice streamlined Haven floats, and the same with bodies for antenna floats. Talking of antenna floats, I do lots of still water waggler fishing, river fishing, and if I want something sensitive and to see little bites, I use something like this. It's a slim piece of peacock with a fairly fine tip. It's about a 2mm tip. Nowadays I tend to use a hollow plastic tip. I think this is actually a cocktail stick that's been painted. But if you want to fish for crucians, you can dot that down and you will see your bites. It will register a number 11 shot, even a 12 shot. And fish it slightly over depth. You don't want lift methods, you don't want treble A's on the bottom. Just shot it down very slightly over depth, incredibly sensitive. And it will show those bites, no bother at all. What you actually get people doing is, I haven't made this up, people buy these bodies, balsa bodies, and then they get, this is 3mm cane, and then they paint great big bands on the float, just like that. And they call it a crucian lift float, or a tench lift float. And the idea is that you have it shotted down to there, and this thing comes hurtling out of the water, because to do that you need quite a big shot on the bottom or there, and that's how you're going to catch crucians. But as I've shown, what you really want is a float dotted down, and you will see all the bites you want. You'll hit them, and if possible I use a pole float taking about 1/2 gram to 1 gram depending on how deep it is, usually fishing quite shallow for crucians, and shot the pole float down. You can't miss them. What you don't get with crucians is great big lifts. In fact, with tench you don't get great big lifts unless you put a huge shot on there. Why put a huge shot? You can fish a number 6 as the bottom shot, and floats like this will show it very well. So you end up with this horrible, it gets worse. Some of them, I've just mocked this up. This is a bit of 4mm cane, in fact almost 5mm cane. The body's well away from the base. I can move that, that's pretty crude on there. And you've got a sort of heavy float, quite unbalanced. Why bother? I don't have a problem with cane antennas. If you're going to make one, push the float right down to the bottom. It's a type of float Ivan Marks used to use, 2mm and 3mm. Paint just the tip, shot it well down, it will register bites. For some reason those old cane antennas used to work quite well with a number 4 shot as the bottom shot, but a long way from the hook, around about 2 foot from the hook. You'd think I tend to fish number 8s and 10s now, but that would work quite well. But once you push that well away from there, somewhere in the middle, it's cockeyed, it doesn't sit right. It will sit right and you can use it, but don't make it with 4 and 5mm cane. Room 101, that one. And don't paint all that, just paint the last 1/2 inch, that's all you need, or inch at the most. But better still, and you've still got that body, that's quite a lot of resistance. Get a decent bit of peacock quill, put an insert in it. Like I say, hollow pole float tips are the perfect job for that, much better. And I use ones with a scoop out, 3mm, not the 2, 3 and 3.5, 4mm with a scoop out, cut off the top so the water can flow in and out. They are incredibly sensitive. They will show the movement of fish actually taking the bait, never mind a number 11 shot. They are that good. But And we're now coming on to wagglers. Peacock quill, brilliant stuff for making wagglers. It's light, you put a little piece of cane in at the base, you can have a float adapter. In this case it's got a little eye whipped on it. I don't change floats that often when I'm pleasure fishing. If I do, I might use an adapter. If I haven't, I can break off and start again. It doesn't take that long, it's not a big deal. But of course you've got to get your peacock quill, and one alternative for many years was plastic drinking straws, which the government banned the sale of those 2 or 3, 4 years ago, whenever. So you can't buy those anymore. I've got a few, most of them are a bit too soft. So why not use something that's free, that grows in by the acre, down in sunny Dorset on the riverbanks and on the marshes. You get Norfolk Reed, and it feels fairly light. And it's quite surprisingly strong, doesn't bend much. And if you pick the right time of year, not in the summer, in the sort of late autumn. These were picked this week in March. What could go wrong? And I did weigh a piece of one of these against a made up solid peacock quill, and the raw piece of reed weighed about the same as the made up peacock quill. But it is heavier as a material, and it has the disadvantage, although it's strong, it can be quite brittle. And that, for me, that's what you want to. Norfolk Reed floats can be made, they look lovely, they're all varnished and people put whippings on them and all the rest of it. They don't fish as well as peacock. The peacock, by the time you've put a cane tip and some coats of paint on it or varnish, this becomes heavy, the balance goes, they don't cast quite so well, and it's always got this problem of maybe splitting like this, and that's about the best thing you can do with them. Another float to look at, admire, say how wonderful it is, but fish with the good stuff. And again, taking Jim Baxter's The Rising Antenna, which has got to be the gospel as far as waggler fishing. There are almost all peacock wagglers in there. These are top waggler anglers, hundreds of years of experience, the very best, all saying the same thing. Peacock wagglers, don't put much paint on them, as little as you can get away with, seal the ends, put inserts if you want. Jobs are good, and one or two say about drinking straws, but as I've said, that's now a material that's come to become obsolete, so we can probably forget about that one. Probably someone's going to take the bait on this one. If you like floats that look fantastic and you pay some float maker a small fortune for his time, because it's the time you're paying for, not that the materials cost the same whether you make them out of whatever, peacock or Norfolk Reed. Norfolk Reed might be free, but you still got to paint it and all the rest of it. But you're paying for the time of whipping and faffing about. It's your money, you spend it how you like. But I like my floats to work well. And I'm going to leave you with a quote from Ivan Marks from his float fishing video that he did at Cuttle Mill sometime around about 1989. And you just listen to that. I've put the words up as well on the screen. Ivan knew what he was talking about. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.